In this video, we will discuss how long COVID disrupts the brain, causing pain, fatigue, and fuzzy thinking. Michelle Wilson got COVID 3 years ago. She's still waiting for her brain, as well as her nervous system, to recover. Wilson's memory is spotty. She's frequently in pain, and even a short walk leaves her exhausted. Wilson has said, "I actually had to buy a cane that turns into a seat so I can go to the botanical gardens." This is a big change for Wilson, who is 66 years old, who had worked as a nurse at Barnes-Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. But years after waiting to get better, she said she's realized something. This might be as good as it gets. Experts say it's a story shared by a growing number of COVID-19 long haulers, those patients who suffer from persistent symptoms long after the initial infection had passed. Many of those symptoms, experts say, appear to be tied to COVID's effect on the brain and nervous system. Government surveys suggest that millions of people in the United States are living with neurological symptoms linked to long COVID. Many, like Wilson, were infected before vaccines became available. Dr. Robin Klein, who directs the Center for Neuroimmunology and Infectious Diseases at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, has said, "It's a public health crisis." Dr. Zayed Al-Ali, who holds positions at both Washington University and the Veterans Affairs St. Louis healthcare system, has said, "There are a lot of people suffering, and those people need treatment yesterday." But treatment remains a distant promise. Dr. Troy Torgensen of Allen Institute for Immunology in Seattle has said, "There's still a ton that we don't know, and scientists are nibbling away at the problem." The virus appears to do most of its damage to the brain indirectly. An infection in the body triggers an immune response that leads to inflammation in the brain. And the inflammation can persist long after the virus has apparently been cleared. The brain may be especially vulnerable to COVID because the disease appears to weaken the blood-brain barrier, which usually protects the organ from both germs and the immune cells that follow them. Another possibility is that COVID-related inflammation affects the vagus nerve, which carries signals between the body and the brain that are important to memory and attention. In this section, we will talk about the lungs to the brain. Early in the pandemic, doctors tended to focus on what COVID did to a person's lungs. In those days, at the beginning of the pandemic, Wilson was working in the post-anesthesia care unit at Barnes-Jewish Hospital. Wilson said, "I got people ready for surgery and woke them up after their surgeries. I loved that job." But the job put her in close proximity to lots of potentially infected patients. and in November of 2020, Wilson got the disease. When the symptoms grew worse, she went to the emergency department at her own hospital. She said, "I had bilateral pneumonia, and I was in sepsis by the time. My blood pressure was really low, and I had an irregular heartbeat." The infection was primarily in her lungs, but it was also disrupting her brain, including the circuits that controlled the blood pressure and heart rhythm. Al-Ali has said, "Unfortunately, long COVID, as we know it, can affect nearly every organ system, including the brain." People with neurological symptoms do get better, but recovery is rare. Three years after getting COVID, Wilson continues to struggle with a range of symptoms, including an unreliable memory. Wilson has said, "I have trouble with word retrieval, concept retrieval, and sometimes like remembering where I was going." Wilson also has problems sleeping at night, a condition that Al-Ali says affects about 40% of people with long COVID. As a result, they wake up fatigued, which contributes to their exhaustion from even moderate activity. Poor sleep can also contribute to the pain that many long COVID patients report. Al-Ali has said, "It's not only my wrists are hurting or my knees are hurting, it's really almost like the whole body aches." When Wilson first came home from the hospital, she was in agony. Wilson said, "The pain across my chest, in my arms, was so bad that I slept with pillows under both my arms because I couldn't stand my arms to touch my chest." Now, Wilson is able to do things like make breakfast or take a shower, so long as she takes her pain medication. Immune system gone wrong? There's growing evidence that even a mild case of COVID can cause long-term changes to the immune system that affects the brain as well as the nervous system. Torgerson of the Allen Institute was part of a team that studied blood samples from 55 people who had symptoms at least 60 days after a COVID infection. He said, "Even though only a handful of patients had been sick enough to be hospitalized, we still saw persistent ongoing immune activation in about half." Once the immune system gets fired up, it can affect the brain, even if the virus itself doesn't infect brain cells. For example, circulating immune cells and antibodies may cross from the bloodstream into the brain and damage neurons, or the presence of an infection may activate a special set of immune cells found only in the brain. Long COVID also has some striking similarities to autoimmune diseases, which occur when the immune system mistakenly attacks healthy cells, Torgerson has said. Lupus, for example, can cause inflammation that results in joint pain and fatigue. When lupus reaches the brain, it can also cause the sort of brain fog that we often see in long COVID. Now we will discuss a mouse model of COVID. To learn more about how long COVID affects a human brain, scientists have been studying mice that develop a mild version of the disease. Klein has said those animals have cognitive defects a month after they were infected. They no longer have the virus. They're no longer ill. But they can't remember and recognize things. One reason may be that the infection weakens the blood-brain barrier in these animals, allowing their body's immune response to affect brain cells. The result is inflammation that causes subtle but significant changes in the brain. Klein has said, "It's not like there's a multitude of dying neurons. What there is elimination of the connections between neurons." Klein suspects that something similar is happening to the synaptic connections in the brains of people who get long COVID. And she says it appears that this can happen even in people who don't get very sick. You and I may handle viruses differently. I may end up getting more inflammation in my brain than you because we have a different genetic makeup. One way to protect the brain after an infection may be with drugs that reduce inflammation, and studies to test that idea are already underway. In the meantime, vaccinations offer a way for people to reduce their risk of developing long COVID. Michelle Wilson, though, got infected before vaccinations were an option, and she'd like a treatment that can undo what COVID has done to her brain. We don't know everything about COVID yet, so I have hope.